Morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. I'm Leah Smith. I'm your moderator on today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an amazing bit of content for everyone. But before we get to that, a couple of housekeeping issues for everyone on the line with us. First, we are on a recorded line, and this recording will be shared out close to end of this week at the very latest. So just keep your eyes peeled on your inbox for an email from us with this webinar recording so that you can share it out with your friends and colleagues to show them some of the learnings from this webinar. Secondly, if you have a question, I want to strongly urge you to put that question in the chat or in Q&A, whichever you feel most inclined to use. Please leverage that throughout the course of this webinar. And lastly, let's get into some intros, right? So as I mentioned, I'm Leah Smith. I'm your moderator for today's webinar and the marketing manager here at ListEngage. And on the line with us, we have two just absolutely stellar people. We've got Angela and Mark. So a little bit of background here about the team, right? Angela comes to us from a strategic consulting background. She's one of our strategic consultants with 15 years of experience guiding clients and customers through the evolution of digital marketing. And I want to really hone in here on what that means conceptually. Angela is the person that you call when you have a really big vision and you're just not sure what steps you need to take to get there or what strategy to apply. Angela does that every day. And then we've got Mark on the line. Mark is our service delivery manager. And so Mark complements this conversation with key components of implementation and what it means for the average Salesforce user and for everyone else who's implementing A/B testing models. Between the two of these people, we're going to have a phenomenal conversation on advanced testing practices and really where we should be thinking about it and how we should be thinking about it as marketers. So what are the big ideas for today? The big ideas that we're going to focus on are going to be frequency, content, and then evolution. Those are going to be the three themes that you see throughout this webinar. And with no further ado, we really sped through those intros, right? I'm going to pass it over here to Angela, who's going to give us some granular themes to think about.
Sure. Thanks, Leah, for that great introduction. Yeah, today we're just going to be talking again about advanced testing. If you're in email marketing, you've probably been testing subject lines and email elements, templates, things like that for a long time. But you also realize that email marketing is growing considerably still every year. And at this point, people are getting upwards of 120, 130 emails in their inbox every day. Aside from that, everyone is getting more SMS, more mobile push. There's just a lot of messages that are coming in that are distracting people. And so as people are getting more messaging all of the time, they're also getting a lot more distracted, and it becomes harder to get significant findings from those micro tests, like what color is a button, or if you're using an emoji in a subject line. And aside from that, with email going back as long as it does now, and there's designers that are specifically digital and all of that type of stuff. So in most instances, maybe not all emails are beautiful, but a lot of companies are already using designs and best practices. So that is another reason that it really becomes hard to move the needle with those little tests. So that doesn't mean that testing isn't important. It's still as important as it ever was, but now we need to start thinking about looking at the macro side of things, at the customer journey, at the customer experience, and not so much at the micro, those little things within a template. So that's what we're going to get into today.
Phenomenal. And what we're going to do on today's webinar, beyond these granular themes, thematically speaking, is going to be a lot of questions, or rather three key questions that we want you to really think about when you're looking at your advanced testing. And our first question of the day is all on send frequency. So question one, what does the best frequency for sending to our customer base look like? Angela, I think you get this question every week, right? What does that frequency need to be? And
absolutely.
Then through, right? So although there are some best practices on deciding that frequency, Angela, is there a one size fits all? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Absolutely not. So I wish that there was, just a answer that we could give every client, because they really do all ask that. But it doesn't, regardless of your audience, everyone has a large audience. So even within your audience, you're going to have different answers to that question. And there's lots of ways you could test this. For the sake of time today, I'm gonna focus on like an automated customer journey type thing. So if you want to look at frequency over time, a campaign that might be good for this hypothetical would be a nurture program. Would be a great candidate. So within a nurture program, you might take your audience and segment it into a few different buckets, and then send each of those buckets down different paths. And then you can see over time. Again, this type of testing is more long game than your typical basic testing where you're sending one test. So there's lots of things to consider when you're coming up with your strategy. So again, we'll just kind of go on a hypothetical here, but you're going to want to look at the size of your audience, because that's going to determine how many segments you might be able to break it up into. Because if you have a larger audience, you can actually, you could potentially test more segments or more paths. If your audience is small, you'll want to stick to probably just one or two tests. You can also look at like the rate of growth of your audience. So if you're doing a nurture program, how many people are being added to your program on a regular basis, and that will kind of help you determine too. Again, 2 or 3 audiences is plenty, really. Keeping it simple is more manageable. But if you have a larger audience and you want to go bigger, you absolutely can. You also want to take into consideration how many emails you have available. So if you're doing a nurture program, perhaps you have 12 emails that you're trying to send out to your audience over time. And when you set that up, you'd want to look at having a control group who would receive your emails at your current tempo that you've got, and then maybe a couple test groups. So that might look like a control group that gets emails twice a month, and then a test group that gets emails weekly, and then another group that would get emails just once a month.
Right. And
yeah.
Angela, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, the last thing I was just going to say is looking at segments. So depending on what data you have available to you, you could absolutely just do random audiences and send them down paths. But if you know certain things like how often, or your more loyal customers, you might just know instinctively that you might want to send that group more frequently, and then your less engaged customers, you might want to send to them less. But there's, again, lots of strategies you could take to come up with those groups.
Absolutely. I love the way that you are thinking about the considerations here, Angela, when we're looking at content types, to the size of the audience, to the segmentation availability, and the number of emails. And when I'm putting on my marketer hat and I'm really thinking about this, it pivots me over into the world of Einstein engagement frequency. And I was hoping that Mark could really help us hone in on the implementation here and really what that looks like with Einstein engagement frequency. Mark?
Yeah, definitely. First, to just add to the conversation, I kind of look at this as in terms of dating, right? For all my single people out there, raise your hands. How many times do you contact your new relationship partner, right? Twice a week, 3 times a week, and so it's important to get that mix together, right? Otherwise, you're going to run them off, or otherwise, you're going to get a stage 5 clinker. And so, our services delivery team can actually come up with multiple solutions, but we typically will look at a client's data model, look at a client's capabilities, their abilities to generate segmentation, their abilities to build out a master data model, and as you mentioned, Leah, one of the out-of-the-box functions that Salesforce Marketing Cloud brings to play for this is Einstein engagement frequency. So as you see on your screen, out of the box, based on 28 days of engagement, right? Einstein will aggregate and group your subscribers into 4 of those segments, right? Saturated, almost saturated, undersaturated, on target. Of course, you'll have established hopefully a baseline understanding of open rate, click rate, engagements, right, based on your past sending behavior. So you'll want to get some send time in the platform a little bit before you generate this. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see that actually Journey Builder inside of it, we can break that out. And so, you know, general on what this shows is, hey, if we were to let Einstein break out our segments into 4 different ones, maybe all of them get the original email. And then as you're testing, you could test out, okay, what does undersaturated look like waiting 7 days to get another email, right? And this could be done on an evergreen basis. You could generate this and run this on an ad hoc basis if you wanted to, and just run 2 simple emails over the month. And so as most clients come in here, they will let this run for a period of time, a certain sample set to come through, and then you can version up the journey and then change your dates, change your wait times in between, and kind of get a measurement of how that test goes through there. So
phenomenal. Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, that I think is the perfect segue into the next big question of the day. And I think it goes perfectly with this idea of the myth or the fact of best frequency. And the follow-up to me here is content mix, right? So how many emails should I be sending to my audience? Angela, I'd really love for you to hone in here for us on some considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, another great question that we get asked all the time. Everyone, of course, wants to be sending their subscribers the right mix of content. And some companies have robust preference centers, you know, and that allows subscribers to opt in or out of very specific campaigns, or allows them to just establish what their areas of interest are. But even if you have that, even companies that have that don't necessarily have a large amount of their subscribers going in and filling that out. You know, so even if they have that, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to segment everyone. So how can you optimize content mix if you don't have their explicit preferences identified in a preference center or profile center? So one thing I like to recommend is going and determining out implied preferences. So that would mean preferences that you can assume to be true about your subscribers based on the actions that they've taken. So if someone is consistently clicking on, you know, your flash sales or your new product emails, you can assume that those are, you know, that those are emails that are of interest to them. And then you can just, again, kind of come up with that as they're implied. So how do you turn the implied preferences into a test? So one example for that would be more for ad hoc sending. So in our first case, I was talking more to what might be a journey, ongoing customer journey, whereas this would be more of an ad hoc send, where you could go in and look at your data and try and figure out trends that you're seeing. So if you have the ability to, if you're in Marketing Cloud, you know, you can do some queries and whatnot and figure that out, and Mark will get into that. But whatever way you might have to look at your customer data, you can hopefully find some trends on if there are people who are, you know, opening certain emails and nothing else, or if you've got a big group that is opening, you know, a good amount across the board. This test is, of course, good for companies that are actually doing a good mix of sends. So if you're sending flash sales and weekly sales and new product emails and a newsletter, and you want to, you know, make sure that you're grouping people properly. So one thing to do with this would be, again, starting with a control group, and that group would receive all of the content mix as they always have. And then depending on what you identify in your trends, you can do your tests. So if you identify, for instance, that there is a group that is opening pretty much just flash sales, and then maybe they're opening some other stuff occasionally, you could potentially segment that group into 2 test groups. One that only receives your flash sales, and then another group that receives your flash sales and maybe something else like the new product emails. But if you want to do that, you need to create test groups that you can use repeatedly over an extended period of time. So you wouldn't want to just test this on one ad hoc send. You'd want to look at testing this repeatedly with these groups over time to see if this, if this actually impacts the value or the engagement of your subscribers. So with that, I will kick it over to Mark to talk more about that.
Yeah, and I'll add in, a lot. I see a lot of clients that will set it and forget it type personas and groups, and what I'll walk through here could allow a marketing team to modify, add, or remove to that persona mix as well. And so, jumping back before I go into this, I do want to mention, if you have the ability to create a preference center where subscribers can self-select, we can build that out for you, and our service delivery team does help with that stuff, right? If you don't have those capabilities, and I personally think that subscribers' activity, it speaks more than their self-selection. If they come on, they don't really know what they don't know until they get your emails. And so if you wanted them their activity to represent their what persona or group they fall in, typically we can build out an automation, and that's what you're looking at on the next slide. And typically we our technical producers can come in and write some SQL queries, set up some data filters for you, where we're creating like a master data model for you, identifying folks that would fall into persona A, and that may be a person that clicks on flash sales, opened a newsletter, and whatever mix it is, right? Obviously, you as client and marketing teams, or even working with our strategy team, could identify those personas before you come and do an implementation. But yeah, this allows you to kind of rerun on an ad hoc basis, as you were mentioning, Angela. It allows you to build your master. You could modify a data filter, and this is an automation inside of Marketing Cloud that you're looking at, and then have the send email go to the filter results, right? And so you could modify that on the fly after you've run it for a certain period, certain number of times, number of sample sets through that. There's multiple solutions, but this is a great way to test. Okay, how do I mix up those personas and those content mixes?
Absolutely. And I'd love to take this conversation another step further, down the road here. When we're talking about frequency and what your testing frequency strategy should be, the next logical question is that follow-up frequency. Angela, Mark, I know both of y'all hear this question a lot, right? Is it helpful, or is it overstepping to follow up with those recipients who don't convert? Angela, I really would love your thoughts on a couple of considerations for this follow-up frequency strategy in advanced testing.
Yeah, that is absolutely another question that we get asked all the time. And I think I see a lot of clients that it's become pretty routine now for clients to send an email, especially within a journey, to send an email. If they don't open it, if subscribers don't open it, you change the subject line and send it again. And that has become pretty common. But not every subscriber is the same. So it's good to kind of see what's going on for your overall audience. It's understandable that people are concerned, right? If they send too much too quickly, will we get blocked, or be marked as spam? But if we don't follow up, then are we missing a really good opportunity for conversion here? So and we all know, we've all experienced this, right? You click on something, and maybe you decide right away, oh, it didn't really align with the subject line or whatever, and I'm actually not interested, or you learn more about it and you're not. But there's also so many distractions. So maybe you are really interested in converting, but your kids interrupt, or you get a phone call, or whatever it might be. So we definitely want to try this out and just kind of see what works best for the audience overall. And again, this is really straightforward compared to kind of the two previous examples. But really an example of this might just be that instead of doing that, always sending to people who didn't open, or who clicked but didn't open, the alternative would be to take that group and actually just break them in half and send 50% of those people a follow-up, and then keep 50% of those suppressed from the follow-up, or send them down the path that, that the other group's going down, the group that, did engage or did convert. But so again, it's going to be different. There's no right or wrong answer here, but this will help you get a better understanding of, what works overall. And if there is, you may find that there really isn't a big difference between the two groups. But if you are seeing that your audience responds better to one or the other, it can help you for all of your strategy down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that follow-up frequency, we've got a really great tool that, dare I say, most of our clients use, right? And I'm hoping that Mark can give us some insight here from an implementation perspective into Journey Builder and how it ought to be applying to advanced testing plans.
Yeah, 100%. So that first decision split that you see with the question mark would represent what I would call a conversion, right? And so, as Angela mentioned, it might be a purchase or it might be a download from your website. And so, if you did not join at the very beginning of this webinar, I'll jump back to in terminology of courting or dating. I don't know why I'm on this kick today, but I am. I look at it as conversions. So let's, if your partner had their text message read on, where you could see if they had read your text or not. Do you follow up or do you not follow up, right? Did they, based on if they didn't respond or responded. And so this really is a level of courting your subscribers, right, in a sense. I know it's a silly analogy, but Angela mentioned, hey, do you automatically follow up or do you not? And so that's where that random split comes in, of just being able to break people out, testing. You can put some wait periods in of how long do you wait until you do follow up, or how long do you not follow up on. And so a lot of clients will just automatically say, okay, they didn't open it, or they didn't click the link that I wanted to. I'm just going to blast them over and over and over. And I would say that it doesn't have to be industry standard for you. And your list is going to operate differently, right? And so they may respond to not getting a follow-up. And also, I will mention that everyone wants to test engagement in terms of click, open, downloading, but you also have to keep in mind your unsubscribe and your spam rates, right? So if you're not raising those, right, that's a win as well, and that could be part of your hypothesis testing. And I also threw in this diagram an engagement split, and that's where Journey Builder will have some additional capabilities of did they actually engage with your follow up, right? And you may follow up with your follow up, and you may not, right? And so there's definitely different ways of testing added in there. You could add in wait times, etc. But our team typically tries to automate and build out evergreen campaigns where possible, and so that could be one of the ways that you use this. You could version up your journey, right, and change it, and actually view the discrepancies and changes over time. So, yeah, that's about it.
Amazing. No, I think this is all really great content and information, Mark. And now, we've talked about frequency from a follow-up perspective, frequency from an overall timing and cadence. We've talked about content mixes. And I'd really love to hear from Angela a little bit more on these suggested best practices. Angela?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's best practices, and that really apply regardless of whether you're doing basic testing or advanced testing. So one thing that I think we've kind of thrown out the word hypothesis maybe a couple times here, and that's definitely where you want to start with testing. You want to make sure that you have a hypothesis, because if you don't, you may not fully understand what your results are. Hypothesis will give you a purpose and an understanding to your results. So if you say, oh, I think that a subject line with emoji will work better because it gets more attention in the inbox, you'll know, yes, it did win out, no, it didn't, and you'll be able to say, very conclusively that your hypothesis was right or wrong, and that you have findings from your test. So another important thing is to know what KPIs you want to measure and make sure there's no roadblocks to gathering that data or understanding your results. There's nothing worse than putting all the time into a test and then realizing that for some reason data wasn't coming through and you don't actually know what your findings were. And kind of around advanced testing for that, again, I think Mark kind of touched on this too, where, you know, we're always used to talking about open rates and click-through rates, but there are a lot more things such as opt-outs or you know, spam, those types of things. But with advanced testing, you also want to consider things like lifetime value of customers, engagement over time. Those types of things are what you're looking for. You're looking for having an impact to your customer in a greater way than just, you know, something small from one test, you know, a few more clicks or something like that. And then right along with that, you want to make sure you're documenting your results. You don't just, you know, you want to make sure that you're putting them in a spreadsheet, or you're printing out a report, or, you know, emailing out a report, or that type of thing. So you're actually putting those in a place where you can utilize them, you can share them out with other people, because maybe your results will be good, you know, for cross-channel and those types of things. So again, you know, having the hypothesis, but also making sure that you can capture that and use it, use your results in the future. We've talked about sample size. You definitely want to make sure your sample size is large enough. And there are formulas that help you calculate statistical significance, but there are also a lot of really smart data people that have already done that work for us. So I always just go to, there's a few different sites that have calculators where you can just type in your information and you'll know if your test has been running long enough. And so I highly recommend doing that. Including a control group. We've talked about that on every scenario that we played out here earlier, because you want to make sure that you can see if there's a lift off of what you've been doing. Hopefully there's not a decrease, but, you know, either way, you want to make sure you see what your results are compared to what you've, you know, historically been doing with your subscribers. And then the last thing is that, you know, we always recommend you automate whenever possible. Not just to keep Mark and his team busy, but you know, we've never had a client that has come across and said, I have nothing to do. I have so much time on my hands, right? Everyone is really busy. Your resources, your bandwidth, you don't have a lot of it. So anytime that you can automate a test, we, you know, highly recommend it. It also just keeps things consistent. So it's just it's a good thing to consider when you're running your tests.
Yeah. And I think these best practices apply across the board, no matter which type of advanced testing you're leaning into, right? This is a really good way to put that blueprint together of what the advanced testing plan should look like for you, regardless of industry or advanced test type. And before we move into questions, we're going to do a quick recap on everything we've talked about today so far. After this portion of the webinar, we're going to pivot into some questions and answers. Mark, Angela, we did have a few questions come in during the prepared content portion of the webinar. So we're going to start with those, and then we'll go into a couple of questions that were submitted prior to this webinar, right? So Angela, can you give us a high-level review of the advanced testing recap? And Mark, can you salt and pepper in some of that implementation wisdom here? Yeah, Angela, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to recap quickly, there is a time and place for basic testing. I don't want to rule that out and say that we shouldn't be doing that anymore. For instance, if you've got new designs, new campaigns, new segments that you've not tried, you can, especially if you see that newer things that you're doing are maybe underperforming based on, like, compared to historical campaigns that you've run or things like that, you can definitely sprinkle those in. Plus, the basic tests are usually, you know, less level of effort, especially if it's a subject line test or things like that. So there's no reason not to do them. It's just, especially if you're getting frustrated because you're doing those things and you're not seeing results, that's when we recommend, you know, taking it a little further and going with some of these advanced things. Again, that already kind of speaks to the shifting from a micro testing to macro testing, and not being afraid to do some of those longer term tests for a larger impact. And again, now you're looking at once you're doing advanced testing, you should be looking at, in addition to your standard email KPIs, you should really be looking at bigger things like loyalty of customers over time, the value, the spend, the average spend, all of those types of things, and seeing if those types of metrics are performing better over time once you've implemented some of these tests. And then you're also looking at testing on segments. We pretty much every test that we just talked about was not on your entire audience. It was looking at smaller groups, looking at data and behaviors and segmenting those segments into tests. And then lastly, as always, whether you're doing basic or advanced testing, it should always be iterative and ongoing. You should always be kind of thinking it down the line to what you want to test next. And then things will pop up too as you're testing that you weren't thinking about. But it's, it should never stop. You just always want to be testing and finding out the latest and greatest about your audience.
And our service delivery team, that's a lot of marketing teams. They do the foundational identifying of segments, but I do think that a lot of clients get held up on inability to use their data, and that's where our service delivery team can come in and help you build out smaller audience segments and keep your controls and keep your standard revenue, and also, we've shown Einstein and Journey Builder. We will typically try to use out of the box functions and capabilities for advanced testing, just to help the client keep reiterating and growing and evolving. But we also do a lot of custom work, right, as well. And so at the end of the day, I guess my whole point of that is it all starts with a plan on paper, right? And so a lot of times, not a lot of times, but we do get into calls where it hasn't been fully written out, and I think that's important of writing your hypothesis in those and just following through the best practices that Angela had noted before, right? Before you get to implementation. So.
Absolutely. So we've really gotten in the weeds here with advanced testing. We've covered off on those best practices. We've done this recap. Now we're going to transition into the question and answers portion of today's webinar. Now, a lot of questions were submitted in advance of this webinar from folks who are on the line now who just had a question burning a hole in their keyboard, right? And we did have a few questions come in during the webinar. So the first thing I want to do is ask you both, Angela and Mark, let's start with Angela here. Do you have any testing recommendations for the holiday season? This came in during the webinar today, and I think it's a really relevant question to kick off today's conversation.
Yeah, so testing at the holidays can be a little bit of a tricky thing, right? Because usually subscriber behaviors can be completely different during this time of year. So you do want to be careful what you do with that information. Also, it's just a crazier time of year, so just everything involved in the process of testing can be a little bit difficult, or a little bit more difficult, right, this time of year. But I would say it is nice if you can do some testing to do that during the holidays and take it into consideration for future holidays, right? So that you're ready, you can alter your strategy and that type of thing for the following year. So there's definitely some reasons that you might test and some things that you might do. But again, you just want to think about the differences that are occurring during the holidays versus other times of year and behaviors and all of that.
And this kind of comes into play, that follow-up conversation, right? I'll be honest, I am hitting delete all through the holidays because I get a million. And sometimes you get frustrated, subscribers get frustrated and report you as spam. That will get you, that will block them in Marketing Cloud All Subs, right? And so just testing follow-up or not follow-up, complaint rate and unsubscribe rate, like I said, mean a lot. And so sometimes it's not always, hey, did I get a click and get a conversion? But sometimes it's did I say face with my long-term customer, right? My long-term subscriber.
Mm.
And so that, anyway, the holiday might be a good opportunity for you to test follow-up and not follow-up. So.
Absolutely. I think that is the perfect segue and very on track with the first pre-submitted question that we've got, which is it too late for my organization to try this for the holidays? Angela, this comes from one of our viewers who's from the retail background, just trying to figure out, gosh, is it too late? I've gotten a couple of Cyber Monday deal emails so far just this morning. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I guess I would say it's not necessarily too late, but again, I wouldn't propose doing too much of this stuff. It also will definitely matter like what all the stakeholders and everything, think. I know from organization to organization, some are more liberal about testing and changing things up during the holidays and some are not. If you are going to be doing testing during the holidays, it's probably advantageous to keep your control groups a little bit larger, especially if you know that what you've done in the past works. Keep your testing groups maybe a little bit smaller. But if you have something, that you really, a good learning that you want to get from the holidays, absolutely you could still do it. It wouldn't work out for some of these longer term things, like, we're talking about nurture programs and stuff like that. That obviously wouldn't really come into play for the holiday, but there's certain things that you could do. Again, depending on what your stakeholders and your company's stance are during this time of year.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Our very first diagram that we had shown talked about Einstein frequency, and if you have 28 days of sending patterns in your marketing cloud account, you could try to let's just say you took undersaturated folks and put them into a journey and try to send them an email every day, right?
Yeah.
You could test that. You could test, like I just mentioned, the follow-up and not follow-up thing as well. We in this webinar, we try to present some out-of-the-box functions, some custom stuff, thoughts as well. But yeah, I think Einstein is probably the best out-of-the-box for your holiday opportunity right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think the short answer here is maybe yes, right? For both of y'all, right? Like try it and just be very strategic. Have that larger group be your control if you're going to launch something for the holiday season and you're wanting to have that data. And Angela, I'm reflecting on something that you said earlier, the critical nature of having that comparative analysis. Mm-hmm. Right, for that variance we see in subscribers from holiday season versus the rest of the year. So maybe another nugget of wisdom to think about coming from Angela and Mark today. And up next, I'm calling this a big question. Oh, Mark,
I'm not just full of dating advice, I got other tips and tricks. Right?
Man of many talents. I've got a big question here for us. And I'm calling this the big question because multiple people submitted this or something similar to this, right? Trying to figure out that best first step. And I think that's probably the hardest step for a lot of folks who are looking at advancing their testing plan. Emily, I noticed that you posted this in the questions and answers earlier. So I wasn't trying to make you wait, but it was embedded here. So we're going to get to this now. Angela, can you take a first response here at that first step?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is a no-brainer. It's to develop an actual test plan. I think Mark spoke to it earlier. It can be a little overwhelming when you want to do your testing, but get it down on paper, figure out what you're going to do, put your descriptions of your tests, your hypothesis, and figure out what KPIs, what metrics are going to be involved in each of those, and just kind of brainstorm all the things. But definitely a test plan. You don't want to start doing testing without knowing what you're testing and why you're testing it, and having it all thought out. Or else you risk again just not getting the full benefit of it, and missing out on things. So start with a test plan.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, this next question takes a step further here of how long does it take to launch? Angela, can you, is there a one answer to that, or what does that look like to you?
There's not really one answer, but I I think, you know, I can say usually about 2 to 4 weeks is a good time frame. When I'm building a test plan, usually it's based around, you know, pre-existing campaigns. So I will dig into the metrics, see where there's opportunity for improvement, and then just start kind of brainstorming what tests would help improve those particular metrics. So then I put together, again, the description of the test, the hypothesis behind it, the metrics that go along with it. But typically it's not, you know, just my decision. So then I've got to run it by stakeholders, resources, the technical team. If I'm lucky, I will have very little feedback and we can start implementing it quickly. But typically there's things, especially when working with clients, they've got, you know, internal knowledge and things that, you know, they've got priorities, or they know their own internal, you know, resource restrictions or things like that. So usually there's a little tweaking back and forth, and that's why it can sometimes take more like a month to finally get everything down on paper and buy-in on all of those things. But you could certainly do it in a week or two if there were less people involved and maybe more simple. So.
Absolutely. And getting a little bit more implementation oriented here, Mark. I'm looking at you, and this is coming from somebody who has Journey Builder. They also use that out-of-box A/B testing functionality in Email Studio, right? And so they've got both options here in front of them, and they're trying to figure out, gosh, what is that cost benefit analysis? What's the better path for me? Do you have any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think going back to Angela's points of trying to let a test campaign run long enough and to automate. Typically, you know, the A/B testing in Email Studio is ad hoc one-time sends. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to evolve and grow. And so while I understand that the canvas of a journey and Journey Builder can become very large and complex, right? I also see the benefits of being able to version up a journey over and over and over, right? To evolve and have a foundation there. And every time you version up a journey with email sends in it, you get new job IDs or new job sends that you can actually reference for in data reporting. And so it makes it a little bit easier to see as you evolve. Obviously, as you all saw on the diagram, where you can add in engagement splits, you can add in random splits. And you can create a smaller sample set of an evergreen test, right, if you wanted to, whereas A/B test in Email Studio is kind of a one and done kind of send. So definitely when possible, we try to use Journey Builder to do most of our testing and just automate evergreen. So
Absolutely. So it sounds like if you're looking for a one-time A/B test, right? A/B testing out of box Email Studio is a great pick. But if you're really leaning into the advanced testing and that longevity, lean into Journey Builder, right?
Yeah.
And I also wanted to kind of transition us into housekeeping again here. So we do have about 2 minutes left in today's webinar. So I wanted to urge everyone, if you have a question that we weren't able to get to, or maybe you didn't post it in Q&A, or you're just now thinking of it, please feel free to email us or send us a note on LinkedIn. We're around, we're here to help. We appreciate everyone's time, and we hope everybody has a phenomenal Monday with a minute back in the day from a phenomenal webinar. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Mark. And thank you to everybody who attended. Bye, y'all.
Great chat. See ya.
Bye.